Lulu. Okay, so as promised, I'm reading Snow White. This illustrated version with lots of pictures. Let's see here. There's Snow White. It says, once, in the middle of winter, when snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat sewing by a window, and its frame was of black ebony. As she sewed, she glanced up at the snow and stuck her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell into the snow. Since the red seemed so beautiful against the white, she thought to herself, if only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as dark as ebony. Soon afterwards she gave birth to a little girl who was as white as snow and as red as blood, and whose hair was as black as ebony. She was named Snow White, and the very moment she was born, the queen died. A year later, the king took another wife. She was beautiful, but proud and arrogant, and could not endure to be surpassed in beauty. She had a marvelous mirror, and she would stand before it and view herself, saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful in the land?" And the mirror would answer, "Lady Queen, you are the most beautiful lady in this land." Then she would be satisfied, for she knew that the mirror was telling the truth. However, Snow White began to grow and increased in beauty, and when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as daylight and more beautiful than the queen herself. The time came when the queen asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful in the land?" And the mirror answered, "Lady Queen, you are the most beautiful here, but Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen was horrified and turned yellow and green with envy. From that hour on, whenever she looked at Snow White, her heart sank, so deeply did she hate the girl. Envy and pride grew ever stronger, like weeds in the queen's heart, and she could no longer rest, neither night nor day. Finally, she summoned a hunter and said, "Take the child away into the forest. I never want to see her again. Kill her and bring me her lungs and her liver as a sign of her death." The hunter obeyed and led the girl away. When he drew out his hunting knife to pierce her heart, she began to cry and said, "Oh, dear hunter, do not take my life. I will run away into the wild wood and never come back again." And since she was so beautiful, the hunter had pity on her and said, "Run away, you poor child. Wild animals will soon devour you," he thought. It was as if a stone had been rolled away from his heart, since he could not bring himself to kill her. And when a young boar suddenly sprang into view, the hunter stabbed him, removed his lungs and liver, and brought them to the queen. She had them salted and cooked, and the wicked woman ate them up, believing that she had eaten Snow White's liver and lungs. Oh dear. Now the poor child was completely alone in the great forest. She was frightened and did not know what to do. She began to run and stumbled over sharp stones and into the thorns. Wild animals sprang past her but did her no harm. She ran as long as her legs could carry her, until just before evening, when she saw a little house and went inside to rest. In the house everything was small, but neat and clean. There stood a little table spread with a white cloth and laid 7 small plates, 7 small spoons, 7 little knives and forks, and 7 little goblets. Against the wall were 7 small beds placed in a row, and covered with white spreads. So hungry and thirsty was Snow White that she ate a bit of vegetable and a bit of bread from each plate, and drank a sip of wine from each goblet, for she did not want to take everything away from any one place. Afterward, since she was very tired, she tried laying down on one of the little beds, but none of them satisfied her. One was too long, another too short, until finally the seventh one seemed to be just right. There she stayed, said her prayers, and fell asleep. When it was completely dark, the owners of the little house returned. They were 7 dwarfs who dug and hacked for gold in the mountain. They lighted their 7 little candles and saw that someone had been there. The first dwarf said, "Who has been sitting in my little chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating from my little plate?" The third said, "Who has taken some of my bread?" The fourth said, "Who has been eating some of my vegetables?" The fifth said, "Who has been using my little fork?" The sixth said, "Who has been cutting with my little knife?" And the seventh said, "Who has been drinking from my little goblet?" Then the first dwarf looked around and saw that there was a hollow place in his bed, and said, "Who has been lying in my bed?" The others came running and called out, "Somebody has also been lying in mine." As the seventh one, however, looked at his bed, he saw Snow White in it, asleep. He called the others, and they came running and shouting with astonishment. They brought their 7 little candles, and light shone on the sleeping girl. "How beautiful the child is!" they cried out. Their joy was so great that they did not wake her, but let her continue to sleep in the little bed. The 7th dwarf slept with his companions, 1 hour with each, and so, in this way, the night went on. In the morning, when Snow White awoke, she saw the 7 dwarfs and became frightened. But they were friendly and asked, "What is your name?" "I am called Snow White," she answered. "How did you come to our house?" continued the dwarfs. Then she told them that her stepmother had wanted to kill her, but that the hunter had spared her life and that she had kept running the whole day until she found their little house. The dwarf said, "Would you like to take care of our house? Cook, make our beds, wash our clothes, knit and sew? If you keep everything neat and clean, you can remain with us, and you will not lack for anything." "Yes," said Snow White, "with all my heart." And she remained with them. She kept the house in order. Every morning the dwarfs went to the mountains looking for gold and ore, and every evening they came back and their food was ready. Throughout the day the girl remained alone, so the good dwarfs warned her and said, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon learn that you are here. Let no one in." The queen, believing that she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver, stepped before her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful in the land?" Whereupon the mirror answered, "Lady Queen, you are the most beautiful here, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times more beautiful than you." Whereupon she was terrified, for she knew that the mirror did not lie. She realized that the hunter had deceived her and that Snow White was still alive, and she thought again and again of how to destroy Snow White. For as long as the queen was not the most beautiful in all the land, her jealousy gave her no rest. And when she finally thought of a scheme, she dyed her face and dressed herself like an old peddler and was quite unrecognizable. In this disguise, she went over the 7 mountains to the house of the 7 dwarfs, knocked at the door, and called out, "Pretty things for sale, for sale." Snow White looked out of the window and said, "Good day, dear woman, what are you selling?" "Good things, pretty things," she answered, "lacings of all colors." And she took out one that was made of bright silk. "I can let this honest woman in," thought Snow White, who unbolted the door and brought the handsome lacings. "Child," said the old woman, "what a sight you are! Come, I will lace you up properly for once." Snow White was not worried. She stood before the woman and permitted herself to be laced up with the new ribbons. But the old woman tightened them so swiftly and so firmly that Snow White gasped and fell down as if dead. "Now you are no longer the most beautiful," the queen said, and hurried away. Not long after, toward evening, the 7 dwarfs came home, but how frightened they were when they saw their beloved Snow White lying on the ground. She neither stirred nor moved. It was as if she were dead. They lifted her up, and when they saw that she was too tightly laced, they cut the ribbons in two. Then she began to breathe a bit, and after a while became more and more lively. When the dwarfs heard what happened, they said, "The old peddler was none other than the evil queen. Take care and let nobody in if we are not with you." When the wicked woman arrived home, she went before the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful in the land?" It answered as before, "Lady Queen, you are the most beautiful here, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times more beautiful than you." When she heard this, blood raced to her heart, so terrified was she, for she realized that Snow White had been brought back to life. "I will think of something," she said. "That will be your downfall." And by means of witchcraft, she made a poisoned comb. Then she disguised herself and again took on the appearance of an old woman. And she went over the 7 mountains to the house of the 7 dwarfs, knocked at the door, and called out, "Good things for sale, for sale." Snow White looked out and said, "Don't bother to stop. I mustn't let anybody in." "Looking will do no harm," said the old woman. She took out the poisoned comb and held it up high. The comb pleased the child so much that she permitted herself to be deceived again and opened the door. When they had agreed upon the price, the old woman said, "Now I will comb your hair neatly for once." Poor Snow White saw nothing wrong and permitted the old woman to do so. But scarcely had the comb touched